He read 74 books, attended 45 seminars, filled notebooks with quotes, underlined paragraphs, and collected wisdom like a man building a library, but his bank account stayed the same. Month after month, year after year, he grew richer in information yet remained poor in results. He knew the language of success, the principles of wealth, the strategies of achievement, and yet his life bore little evidence of any of it. How does this happen? How can a man surround himself with so much knowledge and still fail to transform it into tangible success? The answer is both simple and sobering. Knowledge alone does nothing. It is the application of knowledge, the consistent, deliberate action upon it that changes circumstances. Without action, information becomes like books locked behind glass, beautiful to look at, useless to touch. The difference between the man who reads and grows wealthy and the man who reads and stays broke is not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It is implementation. The first man sees each new idea as a command to act. The second sees it as a concept to admire. The first tests the principle in the real world, adjusts and tries again. The second highlights the passage and moves on to the next book. This is the trap of the information collector. He confuses learning with doing. He mistakes exposure to ideas for the practice of them. And because reading a book or attending a seminar gives a momentary surge of excitement, he feels as though he's progressing, when in truth he's only circling the starting line. Real growth begins the moment you take an idea out of the page and into your life, not when you merely understand it. Many people approach personal development as if it were entertainment. They want to be inspired, uplifted, encouraged, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they stop at the feeling. Inspiration without action is a sugar rush for the mind, sweet for the moment, but quickly fading, leaving you no further than before. The man in our story left every seminar with a folder of notes and a head full of plans, but by the following week, those notes sat untouched. His daily habits returned to what they'd always been. And habits, not hopes, determine results. The truth is, your life today is the sum of your daily routines, not the sum of the information you've encountered. If your routines don't change, your results won't either, no matter how many pages you read. There's also a hidden danger in overconsumption of information. It can create the illusion that you're not ready. The more you learn, the more you become aware of what you don't know, and that awareness can paralyze you if you let it. The man who read 74 books could tell you 20 different ways to start a business, but because he knew so many approaches, he couldn't choose one. He lived in what I call the fog of options. Too many possibilities, not enough decision. Successful people, by contrast, take one proven principle and run with it until they master it. They do not wait to understand everything before acting. They act on what they already understand, and the action itself deepens their understanding. It's important to understand that books and seminars are tools, not treasures. Their value is in their use, not their possession. A hammer on the shelf builds nothing. A hammer in the hand builds a home. The same is true for every piece of wisdom you encounter. If it remains in the realm of theory, it cannot pay you back. The man in our story cherished his library as a badge of seriousness, as proof to others that he was dedicated to growth. But life does not reward how much you know. It rewards how much you apply. The marketplace pays for results, not for potential. And results come from disciplined execution, not from the volume of information stored in your head. There is another layer to this story. Fear disguised as preparation. The man kept reading, kept attending, because as long as he was still learning, he could avoid the risk of failing. Starting meant the possibility of loss, of mistakes, of embarrassment. But so long as he stayed in the comfort of learning, he could protect his self-image as someone about to succeed. This is one of the most common traps in personal development. The endless planning, the perpetual studying, the constant refining of ideas that never see the light of day. The solution is courage in the face of incomplete readiness. You will never know enough to remove all uncertainty, and you don't need to. What you need is enough knowledge to take the first step, and the willingness to learn the rest by doing. You must also remember that the mind retains information in direct proportion to its use. When you learn something and immediately apply it, it sinks deeper, becomes part of your skill set. When you learn and do nothing, it fades. The man who stayed broke believed he was building a vast mental vault of wisdom, but in reality, most of it was slipping away unused. This is why some people with far less education or exposure to success principles seem to advance more quickly. They move fast to execution, and the act of using what they know makes it stick. Application is the cement that locks learning into place. If you find yourself relating to this man, there is good news. You can change course today. You don't need another book before you act. You need to act on what you already know. Choose one principle you've learned, one strategy you've admired, and commit to living it out for the next 30 days. Treat it as if no other information exists. Resist the temptation to chase more input until you've extracted results from the input you already have. This focus will break the cycle of passive learning and initiate the cycle of active growth. And so the moral of his story, and perhaps yours, is this: knowledge is potential power, but only action turns it into real power. Reading 74 books and attending 45 seminars can change your life, but only if you use them to change your days. Without that step, all the wisdom in the world is just ink on paper and words in the air. The choice, as always, is yours. There comes a point where the man who read 74 books and attended 45 seminars has to face the truth. He is not lacking in knowledge. He is drowning in it. Information, when left unused, becomes a kind of mental sediment. It settles in layers, making the mind heavier, slower, and more resistant to action. At first, learning feels like expansion. You feel smarter, sharper, more capable. But without conversion into action, that stored-up knowledge becomes the very thing that traps you. You begin to think you need to read just one more book before you can start. You convince yourself you're not quite ready, because you can always see one more gap in your understanding. And so the cycle continues: consume, store, delay, repeat, until years pass and nothing tangible has changed. The successful know that every piece of information carries an expiration date. If you don't use it, it loses its potency. That's why they move quickly from concept to execution, from theory to trial. One of the traps he fell into was mistaking familiarity for mastery. When you've heard an idea many times, whether it's about saving, investing, selling, or leading, it begins to feel like you've mastered it simply because it's familiar. You can explain it to others. You can nod knowingly when it's mentioned. But mastery is not knowing the words. It's producing consistent results from them. A man can know everything about a healthy diet, be able to lecture on it with confidence, and still be unhealthy. Knowledge is not behavior, and behavior is what produces results. The one who thrives understands that mastery comes from living the principle until it becomes instinctive, not just from knowing how to describe it. Another layer of his problem was that he was too comfortable in the role of the learner. The learner's seat is a safe place. You can ask questions without consequences, make mistakes without cost, and always have the option to defer action until you've finished learning. But in the builder's seat, everything changes. Now decisions have weight, mistakes have impact, progress demands exposure. The reason so many never graduate from learning to building is because the learner's seat offers the illusion of progress without the pain of risk. The man in our story loved the identity of someone who's working on himself, but was reluctant to take on the identity of someone who delivers results. Until that identity shift happens, all learning remains a rehearsal without a performance. Fear was also at the core. The fear of being wrong. The fear of starting small and looking inexperienced. The fear of having no excuse left if he failed after trying. As long as he was still in preparation, he had a shield. If things didn't work out, it was because he hadn't started yet. But action removes that shield. Action exposes you to reality, and reality is the only place results can exist. The men and women who succeed are not the ones who eliminate fear before they start. They are the ones who act in spite of it. They understand that failure in motion is still progress, because it teaches, adjusts, and moves them forward in ways that reading never can. Another reason he stayed broke was that he treated success as something to be studied, not built. You cannot study your way into stronger finances, more influence, or better opportunities. You can only create those through the direct application of what you've learned over and over again until the skill produces results. It's like learning to swim. You can memorize every stroke on paper, but until you get in the water, you don't know if you can actually move. The water is the marketplace. It will not reward what you can recite. It will reward what you can produce. The man also underestimated the role of speed. In the time it took him to read 74 books, another man read 10 and acted on all of them. The second man encountered challenges, made mistakes, learned faster, and adjusted more effectively. In life, speed to action often beats depth of preparation. Acting on partial knowledge and refining as you go is more valuable than waiting until you feel you've acquired complete knowledge, because complete knowledge is impossible. The one who moves learns in real time, while the one who waits learns only in theory. Perhaps the most dangerous effect of his learning habit was that it allowed him to avoid accountability. If he didn't implement, there was nothing to measure, no results to report, no numbers to compare. He could live in a world of potential without ever confronting performance. But accountability is the mirror that tells you whether you're truly applying what you've learned. Those who succeed put themselves in positions where results are visible, sales tracked, deadlines met, outcomes measured, because feedback, even when uncomfortable, forces growth. Without it, learning becomes a form of hiding. And so the real lesson in his story is that education is not the final step, it is the opening move. Every seminar you attend, every book you read, every lesson you absorb must immediately be connected to an action that moves you closer to a result. Otherwise, your learning becomes a museum of possibilities filled with ideas you admire but never touch. And a museum, no matter how beautiful, is a place where nothing moves forward. If you want motion, real motion, you must leave the comfort of collecting and step into the discipline of building. By the time the man had stacked his 74th book beside the others and tucked away the binder from his 45th seminar, he had mastered one thing without realizing it, the art of delaying his own success. He had become so good at preparing, researching, and studying that starting felt foreign, almost reckless. He could analyze markets, recall the best-selling principles of negotiation, outline multiple business models, and even mentor others in theory, but when it came to his own execution, he was still standing on the diving board, staring into the water. What he never saw was that prolonged hesitation is not neutrality, it's decay. Opportunities have a shelf life, skills unused atrophy, and the longer you wait to apply what you know, the more distant action feels until you begin to mistake stillness for safety. One of the greatest weights he carried was the mental clutter of too many unused ideas. Every book and seminar added a handful of them, and instead of putting them into motion, he stored them in his head like a warehouse with no shipping department. They became intellectual inventory, valuable on paper, worthless in reality. The successful don't store value in their minds, they circulate it. They put ideas into the marketplace, test them, adapt them, and refine them through use. They know that an idea in motion is a living asset, while an idea left idle is a liability disguised as potential. His biggest blind spot was that he didn't recognize the cost of inaction. He measured the cost of trying and failing, but he never calculated the cost of not trying at all. Every month he delayed, someone else acted. Every year he prepared, someone else implemented. Those people learned faster, built momentum, and expanded their influence, not because they knew more, but because they did more. The man thought he was avoiding risk, but in truth he was transferring it, trading the risk of failure for the certainty of stagnation. Another hidden trap was his belief that one day he'd feel ready. Readiness in his mind was a kind of emotional green light that would signal the perfect time to move. But the reality is that readiness comes after you start, not before. Confidence is built in the doing, not in the thinking. Those who succeed understand that uncertainty is not a sign to stop, it's an invitation to begin. They step forward with what they have, trusting that the rest can be learned on the way. And as they move, the knowledge they've acquired finally has a place to root itself in real-world application. He also suffered from a quiet addiction to inspiration. Each new seminar was a high, each new book a rush of possibility. But like any high, it faded, and when it did, he sought the next hit of motivation rather than building systems that would function without it. Discipline is what turns peaks of motivation into plateaus of consistent output. Without it, inspiration is nothing more than emotional sugar, sweet for a moment, empty when it passes. The winners use inspiration to ignite action, then let action create its own momentum. A critical flaw in his approach was that he worked entirely in private. His goals, his timelines, and his intentions lived in his head or in his notebooks, unshared with anyone who might hold him to them. Without external accountability, every deadline was optional, every commitment negotiable. Successful people understand the power of public commitment. Whether it's a business partner, a coach, or a small circle of peers, they put themselves in environments where follow-through is expected because they know the mind's default setting is comfort, and comfort rarely leads to results. Over time, the man began to wear the weight of unfulfilled potential. He could feel it in conversations, in quiet moments, in the unease that came when he thought about how long he had been getting ready. Potential is a wonderful thing when it's being used. It's a burden when it's not. Left unrealized, it becomes a reminder of what could have been, whispering through every missed opportunity. The only cure for that weight is movement, decisive, sustained, and unapologetic. And so the sixth lesson in his story is simple but unavoidable. At some point, more information will not make you more capable, only more action will. If you already know what to do, the next seminar won't change you. The next book won't save you. The only thing that will is crossing the invisible line between knowing and doing. Because in the end, the gap between the broke man who studied and the successful man who acted is not filled with knowledge, it's filled with work. By the time the man finished his 74th book and took notes at his 45th seminar, he began to feel a strange hollowness, an unspoken awareness that he could no longer hide behind the excuse of ignorance. He knew enough, more than enough. In fact, he knew more than some of the very people he admired for having achieved the results he wanted. But knowledge without proof is like wealth locked in a vault you never open. It doesn't change your life. And that vault had become his mind, heavy with the weight of unused value. The gap between what he knew and what he lived was now so wide that even he could feel it every time he opened another book or walked into another seminar. There was a quiet voice inside him that said, "You don't need more, you need to do more." And for the first time, that voice was louder than the applause he got for being well-read and always learning. One of the things that kept him broke was his unwillingness to set measurable, non-negotiable targets. He loved broad ambitions like be successful or build wealth, but avoided hard numbers, deadlines, and concrete steps. Why? Because vague goals can't be measured, and if they can't be measured, you can't be held accountable for missing them. It's safer to say, "I'm working on it," than to say, "I will earn this amount by this date through these actions." The successful think differently. They turn dreams into defined objectives, and those objectives into daily disciplines. They track progress, adjust when they fall short, and treat results as the scoreboard, not intentions. Without that shift, the man's goals remain beautiful phrases floating in the air, untouched by the gravity of reality. Another form of self-sabotage was his unwillingness to narrow his focus. He wanted to try a little of everything. Different industries, different strategies, different opportunities, because choosing one meant saying no to others. But in saying yes to everything, he gave himself to nothing. The winners of any game know the power of concentrated force. They pick their lane and pour themselves into it until they dominate it. Only then do they expand. The man's scattered approach left him with shallow roots in too many places, never deep enough to produce lasting fruit. Every time he switched lanes, he reset his progress, and years of effort dissolved into a cycle of fresh starts. The man also failed to create an environment that forced growth. He surrounded himself with people who praised his dedication to learning but never challenged him to act. They were impressed by his knowledge because it made them comfortable. He was one of them, another dreamer, not a doer. But environment shapes identity, and identity shapes action. Those who rise put themselves in rooms where they are the least accomplished person there, where their knowledge is taken for granted, and only results are respected. In that environment, action is not just encouraged, it's demanded. The man's comfortable circle allowed him to stay broke without feeling the sting of falling behind. A hidden anchor holding him down was his relationship with time. He treated it as if it were abundant, renewable, something he could spend freely because there would always be more. This illusion is the slow killer of ambition. Every day spent in delay was a day he could never get back. Every year of preparation was a year stolen from his earning potential, his compounding growth, and his chance to build a legacy. The successful understand that time is the one asset you can't replace, and they spend it like the irreplaceable currency it is. They guard it from waste, they invest it with precision, and they never allow indecision to drain it away. One of the final barriers he faced was his reluctance to embrace discomfort as a permanent companion. He treated discomfort as a sign something was wrong, rather than as confirmation he was stretching beyond his current capacity. As a result, he continually retreated to the familiar the moment the pressure mounted. But discomfort is the weight that builds the muscle of resilience. The men and women who thrive don't just tolerate it, they seek it, knowing it's the forge where skill, confidence, and opportunity are made. The man's life remained easy enough to stay the same, and that ease kept him broke. So the seventh lesson in his story is as direct as it is liberating. Knowing more will not save you, doing more will. The only cure for the weight of unused potential is to turn it into proof. The only way to erase the gap between what you know and what you live is to take the next concrete step today and then another tomorrow until your actions and your knowledge are in perfect alignment. Because in the end, the world doesn't pay you for what you've learned, it pays you for what you've done with it. And until that shift happens, the man who read 74 books and attended 45 seminars will remain exactly where he's always been, full of promise but empty of results. By the time the man had reached his 74th book and his 45th seminar, he had heard every success story, every principle, every formula. He could recite the language of ambition as fluently as a native speaker, yet when it came to his own life, the script was empty. The great irony was that the very knowledge he'd collected had begun to work against him. Instead of clarifying his path, it had cluttered it. Instead of giving him the confidence to act, it had given him more reasons to wait. He could see every possible angle, every possible risk, and in trying to avoid all of them, he avoided action entirely. Knowledge that is never put into practice becomes a kind of intellectual quicksand. It feels solid when you stand still, but the moment you try to move, it pulls you deeper into hesitation. One of his most costly habits was confusing motion with momentum. He was always working on something, but rarely finishing anything. He'd start a new strategy one week, abandon it the next when a fresh idea from a book or seminar seemed more exciting. He had notebooks full of half-developed plans and incomplete projects, each one abandoned just before the point where persistence would have produced results. The truth is, momentum is not built by constant reinvention. It's built by compounding effort on a chosen path. The man who sticks to one direction for a year will go further than the man who takes 100 different first steps. The trap he couldn't see was the comfort of being seen as a man who's always learning. It earned him admiration from peers and a sense of identity he didn't want to risk losing. In some ways, actually succeeding would have forced him to leave behind that comfortable label. Real success brings responsibility, visibility, and higher expectations. It's safer to be the perpetual student to impress people with what you know, without the pressure of delivering results. But safety is a silent thief. It robs you of the growth that only comes from taking ownership of outcomes. He also underestimated the corrosive effect of unkept promises to himself. After each seminar, he'd make commitments to start a project, to wake earlier, to take a calculated risk. And each time he failed to follow through, his self-trust eroded a little more. Over the years, that erosion became a canyon. The man no longer fully believed himself when he made a commitment, and so his own mind stopped taking his intentions seriously. The successful guard their self-trust as fiercely as their reputation. They understand that keeping promises to themselves is the foundation upon which all external trust is built. Another silent barrier was his relationship with discomfort. He knew, in theory, that growth requires stepping into the unknown, but each time an opportunity arose that demanded real risk or temporary loss, he retreated. The man didn't realize that discomfort is the gatekeeper to every meaningful breakthrough. Those who succeed don't seek pain for its own sake, but they accept it as the price of progress. They lean into the hard conversations, the long hours, the unfamiliar terrain, because they know comfort never created excellence. And then there was the illusion of progress created by constant planning. He loved the act of mapping out scenarios, refining ideas, setting ambitious goals. It gave him the satisfaction of feeling in control, even when nothing tangible had changed. But plans are only valuable when tested against reality. Without execution, they become monuments to what could have been. The winners in any field treat planning as the warm-up, not the game. They use it to set direction, but they measure themselves by what they execute, not by what they imagine. The man's library was filled with wisdom from people who had acted boldly, failed often, and adjusted quickly. But instead of using their stories as blueprints, he treated them like folklore, interesting, inspiring, but distant. He didn't see that the same principles applied to him right where he was. Success is not reserved for a special class of people. It is the result of ordinary people applying extraordinary persistence to simple, proven actions. He already had the principles, he lacked the persistence. So the fifth lesson of his story is this: information will never replace action, and activity will never replace results. If you've read enough to know what to do, the only thing left is to do it. If you've attended enough seminars to fill a calendar, the only thing left is to fill your days with disciplined execution, because at some point another book will not change you, another seminar will not move you forward, and another plan will not bring you closer. Only action will, and until that truth is embraced, you will remain exactly where you are, no matter how much you know. By the time he had read his 74th book and attended his 45th seminar, the man's shelves were full, his notes were stacked, and his mind was heavy with concepts, but his life still looked the same. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If your external world has not changed after all that learning, it's not because you don't know enough, it's because you haven't done enough. He kept looking for the breakthrough idea, the one strategy that would finally flip the switch, not realizing that the switch had been in his hand from the very beginning. Every new book promised it, every seminar hinted at it, but the real change was never in the next piece of information. It was in the first decisive action he kept postponing. Knowledge without execution is like a seed kept in the packet. It will never feed you, no matter how rare or valuable it is. One of his greatest mistakes was that he measured progress by accumulation, not transformation. He thought the number of books read, seminars attended, and notes taken was proof of growth. But the scoreboard of life doesn't count pages, it counts outcomes. You cannot deposit motivation into a bank account, you cannot cash in highlighted quotes, and you cannot pay bills with the memory of an inspiring speech. These things are meant to spark action, not replace it. The man had trained himself to collect inspiration the way some people collect souvenirs, nice to look at but ultimately useless to survival. The winners in life are those who turn each spark into fire and then use that fire to forge something real. There was also the trap of perfectionism masquerading as high standards. He believed he couldn't start until he had the perfect plan, the ideal timing, the flawless understanding of every possible scenario. In his mind, moving without certainty felt reckless, but perfectionism is often just fear in disguise, the fear of being judged, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of discovering that you're not yet as capable as you hoped. The truth is, capability grows in the doing. You don't become a master by avoiding imperfection. You become a master by moving through it. Every entrepreneur, leader, and high performer started with imperfect action and refined along the way. Those who wait for perfection never begin, and those who never begin never win. Another reason he stayed stuck was that he confused planning with progress. He loved the feeling of mapping out the future, filling notebooks with ideas, charts, and timelines. Planning felt productive. It gave him the sense that he was in control. But a plan without execution is a beautifully drawn map to nowhere. The successful use plans as launch pads, not as landing zones. They understand that a plan is only valuable when it gets tested against reality, and reality will always reveal adjustments that no amount of thinking could predict. The man in our story treated planning like a safe space, a place where failure couldn't touch him, but safety is the enemy of growth when it becomes a hiding place. We must also consider the role of habits. He thought success was something that would happen in a grand moment, a single big win that would change everything. But success is not an event, it's a process built in the quiet repetition of small, disciplined actions. Reading about discipline is not discipline. Understanding productivity is not productivity. Habits form the bridge between knowledge and results. Without them, even the best strategies collapse under the weight of inconsistency. The man knew dozens of productivity techniques, but practiced none of them long enough for them to become automatic. The winners take one or two powerful habits and ingrain them until they no longer require willpower, they run on identity. Another subtle factor was his relationship with failure. In theory, he knew failure was part of the process. Every book and seminar had told him so. But in practice, he avoided it. He took only the steps he felt sure would succeed, which meant he rarely took steps at all. The irony is that failure is the tuition you pay for mastery. Every setback contains a lesson that refines your approach. By avoiding failure, he was also avoiding growth. The successful learn to fail forward. They don't just recover, they adjust. And because they keep moving, failure becomes a stepping stone rather than a wall. The last piece of this puzzle is accountability. He operated in isolation. His goals were private, his progress untracked, his deadlines flexible. Without someone or something holding him accountable, every commitment was negotiable. And the mind, left to its own devices, will always negotiate toward comfort. Accountability creates the pressure that turns intention into action. The most disciplined people in the world build systems of accountability around themselves, not because they lack willpower, but because they understand human nature. Alone, you can excuse almost anything. In the presence of accountability, excuses lose their power. And so the fourth chapter of his story brings us to this undeniable truth. If your life hasn't changed after years of learning, the problem is not the quality of the information, it's the lack of application. Every book, every seminar, every lesson is an invitation to act, not an excuse to wait. Until you accept that invitation, you will remain rich in theory and poor in reality. And the most tragic part, the man already had everything he needed to succeed, he just didn't use it.